April the 14th, 1945. Dawn breaks over the bloodied ridges of Okinawa. The air hangs thick with the smell of cordite and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere in the tangled brush of Hill 178, a Marine corporal named Howard Hill draws back a compound bow. Not the M1 Garand his brothers carry, not the Thompson submachine gun slung across his back, but a 70-pound recurve bow, laminated ash and yew, its limbs whispering as the string cuts through humid morning air. The arrow releases, silent. 30 yards out, a Japanese sniper slumps forward in his hide, the bamboo shaft buried deep between his ribs. No muzzle flash, no report. Only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant thunder of artillery rolling across Shuri Line. In 5 days, 116 enemy soldiers will fall to this man's arrows. The Imperial Japanese Army, schooled in Bushido and the way of the samurai, will find themselves haunted not by American firepower, but by a weapon older than gunpowder itself. This is not legend. This is history written in fletched silence. Okinawa, April 1945. Operation Iceberg, the last great island campaign before the planned invasion of mainland Japan. 82 days of unrelenting carnage. The United States committed 182,000 troops to seize this 37-mile sliver of coral and volcanic rock. The Japanese 32nd Army, 110,000 strong, dug into caves, tunnels, and fortified ridges, had orders to bleed the Americans white. No retreat, no surrender, death before dishonor. The Imperial General Staff knew they could not win Okinawa, but they could make victory so costly that the Americans would hesitate before stepping onto sacred Japanese soil. Every ridge became a tomb, every village a kill box, casualties mounted on both sides with mechanical inevitability. 12,000 Americans killed, over 100,000 Japanese dead, military and civilian, combined. Okinawa became the Pacific Theater's Verdun, a meat grinder, where nations fed their sons into the machinery of total war. Into this hell walked Howard Hill, a man who had spent his youth not in the factories of Detroit or the farmlands of Iowa, but in the forests of Alabama, perfecting the ancient art of archery. Before the war, Hill had been a champion bowman, a trick-shot artist who appeared in Hollywood films demonstrating impossible feats, splitting arrows, piercing coins mid-air, downing running game at 60 yards. When Pearl Harbor shattered America's Sunday morning peace, Hill enlisted like millions of others. But unlike those millions, he carried with him a request, permission to bring his bow into combat. The Marine Corps, pragmatic in its brutality, saw potential. Snipers were valuable, silent killers even more so. In the dense jungle and cave warfare of the Pacific, where a single gunshot could reveal a position and draw mortar fire, a silent weapon had tactical merit. Hill received permission. He would hunt men the way he once hunted deer. The Japanese soldiers defending Okinawa expected American abundance. They had been briefed on it, warned about it, told that the enemy possessed unlimited shells, unlimited tanks, unlimited air support. They expected to die beneath waves of steel and fire. What they did not expect was to be stalked like animals, picked off one by an invisible predator who left no sound, no trace, only bodies with wooden shafts protruding from vital organs. In the caves above Kakazu Ridge, whispers spread among the Japanese defenders. A demon walked among the Americans. A silent death that struck without warning. Some said it was a spirit, an onryo seeking vengeance. Others believed it was psychological warfare, some new American trick to break morale. They were half right. Hill's method was patience incarnate. Where other Marines advanced with speed and firepower, Hill moved like shadow. He studied terrain for hours, identifying enemy positions by the smallest signs, a glint of metal, a shift in foliage, the flight pattern of disturbed birds. He understood what the ancient hunters understood. Stillness is a weapon. Silence is armor. His arrows were custom-made, each shaft hand-selected for straightness, each broadhead sharpened to surgical precision. He used hunting points designed to kill deer and elk, wide, razor-sharp blades that caused massive hemorrhaging. Against human targets, they were devastatingly effective. A hit to the torso meant death within minutes, often seconds. A hit to the head or neck, instant. And unlike bullets, which could ricochet or fragment, arrows traveled true, guided by the archer's intent and the immutable physics of the bow. On April 16th, Hill's platoon was pinned down by a Japanese machine gun nest, entrenched in a coral outcropping 400 yards from the American line. For 3 hours, that gun had chewed through 2 squads attempting to flank it. Artillery was called in, but the Japanese position was too well protected, tucked beneath an overhang that deflected shrapnel. Mortars fell uselessly around it. The Marines dug in, waiting for nightfall or a tank. Hill, crouched in a shell crater, studied the position through binoculars. He saw what others missed, a small gap in the coral, perhaps 18 inches wide, where the angle of the overhang created a sight line to the gun crew. Impossible for a rifle. A mortar would never thread that needle. But an arrow, arcing high, descending at 45 degrees, possible. He moved forward alone, crawling through mud and shattered vegetation until he reached a slight rise 60 yards from the target. He could hear the machine gun chattering, hear the brass casings tinkling against stone. He rose to one knee, drew the bow to full extension, felt the string kiss his cheek, calculated windage and drop with the instinct of 10,000 practice shots. Release. The arrow climbed, peaked, fell. Through the gap, the machine gun stopped. Silence. Then screaming, confused shouting in Japanese. Hill knocked another arrow, adjusted elevation slightly, released again, more screaming, then nothing. His platoon advanced. Inside the coral fortress, they found 3 dead Japanese soldiers, 2 with arrows in their chests, 1 with a shaft through his throat. The machine gun, a Type 92 heavy, sat silent, its barrel still warm. Word spread through the division, the archer, the bow marine. Officers came to observe. Some were skeptical. This was modern warfare, after all, the age of radar and flamethrowers and napalm. But Hill's results spoke louder than skepticism. In 5 days of intense combat around Hill, 178 and the approaches to Shuri Castle, Howard Hill personally killed 116 confirmed enemy soldiers. His platoon commander kept meticulous records, verified by other Marines who witnessed the kills. 116 arrows, 116 bodies, a kill rate that rivaled the division's best snipers, men armed with scoped Springfield rifles, and decades of military doctrine behind them. Hill, with a weapon that predated Rome, matched them, shot for shot. But the psychological impact was greater than the body count. Japanese soldiers began to fear the silence. They understood rifle fire. It was predictable, part of the battlefield's expected soundtrack. But the silence, the sudden death that arrived without preamble, without the crack of a gun or the whistle of incoming rounds, that was terror of a different order. It violated their tactical expectations. In their training, they had learned to anticipate American attacks by sound, the rumble of tanks, the roar of aircraft, the thunder of naval guns. Hill's bow rendered that training useless. He could strike from positions where a rifle would give away his location with a single shot. He could remain in one spot for hours, taking target after target, never revealing himself through sound. The Japanese adapted by becoming more cautious, more hesitant to expose themselves. They moved less during daylight. They abandoned some forward positions entirely. An entire enemy doctrine bent around one man with a bow. The recurring symbol of Hill's war was not the bow itself, but the arrows he retrieved. After engagements, when the position was secure, Hill would walk the battlefield and collect his shafts. Those that had not splintered or broken on bone, he cleaned, refletched if necessary, and returned to his quiver. This ritual horrified some Marines. Pulling arrows from corpses seemed medieval, barbaric even, something from a darker age. But to Hill, it was practical. Each arrow was handmade, irreplaceable in the Pacific Theater supply chain. There were no requisition forms for broadhead hunting arrows. What he carried from Alabama was all he would have. So he reclaimed them, wiped the blood on his trousers, inspected the shafts for cracks, and slid them back into the quiver. This act, this recycling of death, became a strange mirror of American abundance. While the artillery batteries fired thousands of shells daily, while ammunition ships unloaded endless tons of bullets and grenades, Hill made do with 30 arrows, using and reusing them with the frugality of a different era. Yet in that frugality was a kind of abundance too, the abundance of skill, of mastery, so complete that scarcity became irrelevant. Japanese officers who interrogated prisoners or read captured documents after the war expressed confusion about Howard Hill. They understood American industrial might. They could conceptualize the B-29s, the aircraft carriers, the unlimited fuel and ammunition, but a soldier choosing a primitive weapon in an age of automatic firearms, this they interpreted as either supreme confidence or profound disrespect. In their minds, the bow represented America's contempt for Japanese fighting ability, as if the Americans were saying, "We do not even need modern weapons to defeat you." This interpretation, whether accurate or not, deepened the psychological wound. It suggested that American abundance extended beyond material goods into an abundance of options, of choices so vast that a Marine could select a medieval weapon and still dominate the battlefield. By April 19th, Hill's position had become untenable, not because of enemy action, but because of celebrity. Other Marines, officers, even journalists embedded with the division, sought him out. His silence, his greatest tactical asset, was being eroded by attention. His company commander, a captain from Texas who understood both Hill's value and the danger of making him a target, quietly rotated him to rear echelon duties for the remainder of the Okinawa campaign. Hill protested but obeyed. He spent the last weeks of the battle training other Marines in basic archery, though none achieved his proficiency. The bow required a lifetime of dedication, muscle memory built through years of repetition. You could train a man to use a rifle in weeks. The bow demanded decades. The transformation was not in Howard Hill. He remained the quiet Alabama bowman before, during, and after Okinawa. The transformation was in the perception of warfare itself. For centuries, military doctrine had moved steadily toward greater firepower, faster rates of fire, longer ranges. The assumption was that primitive weapons belonged in museums, irrelevant to modern conflict. Hill's 5 days shattered that assumption. He demonstrated that in certain contexts, jungle warfare, cave fighting, situations demanding stealth, older technologies possessed advantages that no amount of industrial advancement could replicate. After Okinawa, Special Forces units began experimenting with crossbows and suppressed weapons. The lesson was absorbed. Silence has tactical value. The primitive, properly applied, can outperform the modern. The 116 dead Japanese soldiers became a number, a statistic, in the vast ledger of Okinawa's carnage. But they represented something larger, the collision of expectations with reality. The Japanese High Command had prepared for American firepower, for overwhelming force. They had not prepared for American creativity, for the willingness to use any tool, any method, any weapon that achieved the objective. This flexibility, this pragmatic eclecticism, was itself a product of abundance. A resource-starved military cannot afford experimentation. It must standardize, streamline, eliminate variance. But America, with its industrial base intact and expanding, could afford mavericks like Hill. It could afford to say yes to a Marine who wanted to hunt men with a bow. That abundance of choice, more than the abundance of material, defined the American way of war. On April 24, 1945, Howard Hill fired his last arrow in combat. The target was a Japanese officer, a captain who had been directing mortar fire from a ridgeline overlooking American positions. The range was 73 yards, just beyond the effective range of most bows. Hill compensated for the distance, drew the string until his back muscles screamed, and released. The arrow climbed, seemed to hang in the air, then descended. The Japanese captain collapsed. Hill lowered his bow, slung it across his back, and walked down from the ridge. He never fired another arrow in anger. The war ended 4 months later, after the atomic bombs turned cities into shadows, and the emperor spoke publicly for the first time in Japanese history, telling his people to endure the unendurable. Hill returned to Alabama, to the forests where he had learned his craft. He never spoke much about Okinawa. When pressed, he would say only that the bow worked as well as any rifle, given the right circumstances and the right man behind it. But the 116 men he killed with arrows did not vanish into historical silence. Their names are recorded in Japanese casualty lists, their deaths noted in unit journals. Some had families who waited for them in Kyoto or Osaka or Hokkaido, families who received the news months later, families who never learned that their son or brother or husband had not fallen to machine gun fire or artillery or airstrikes, but to an arrow, a weapon from the age of samurai, wielded by an American who had turned ancient craft into modern lethality. There is a terrible irony in that Japanese soldiers, heirs to the Bushido tradition that revered the bow and the sword, killed by an American using the weapons they themselves had set aside in favor of rifles and machine guns. The past, it seemed, had returned to claim them. In the end, Howard Hill's war became a parable about abundance and choice. The Japanese fought with the desperation of scarcity, every bullet rationed, every position held to the death, because there was no fallback, no reserve, no second chance. The Americans fought with the confidence of plenty, experimenting, adapting, trying unorthodox solutions, because failure was survivable, because the supply lines stretched back to a continent untouched by war, because abundance permitted risk. Hill's bow was not a necessity born of shortage, but a choice enabled by excess. Only a nation rich enough to equip millions with modern firearms could afford to let one man carry a bow. And in that paradox lies the deeper truth. Abundance is not merely material. It is the freedom to deviate, to innovate, to honor individual skill even when it contradicts doctrine. The totalitarian regimes that opposed America in 1945 could not comprehend this. They built their power on conformity, on the suppression of individual variance in service to collective need. America built its power on the opposite principle, that a nation wealthy enough and free enough could harness 10,000 individual talents, even the talent of a man who hunted with a bow. April 1945, Okinawa, 116 arrows, 116 deaths, a medieval weapon in a modern war. And in the silent flight of each shaft, a message older than nations. Freedom is the space between what is expected and what is possible. The Japanese expected American guns, they received American arrows, and they fell all the same.